The Haiku Stairs, also known as the Thousand Steps or Stairway to Heaven, is a popular Oahu hike with great views and postcard moments. It is also illegal. Residents in a nearby Kaneohe neighborhood have endured trespassers and noise for years. The Honolulu Board of Water Supply calls the stairs a liability and wants to tear them down, but it is open to transferring ownership under certain conditions. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Laura Yamada. The Haiku Stairs were built by the Navy during World War II to access communications facilities atop the Ko'olau Mountains. Now, the first stairs were wooden and were later replaced by metal ones. Okay, here's some factoids. There are 3,922 steps. The trail has been officially closed since 1987, but that has not stopped an estimated 4,000 hikers every year from making that climb. The Honolulu Board of Water Supply owns the land under the stairs and spends about $250,000 every year for security. Nearby residents in Kaneohe are fed up with unruly hikers trespassing and making noise and threats and damaging property. The Board of Water Supply wants to remove the stairs, but Mayor Kirk Caldwell wants jurisdiction transferred to the Parks Department so the trail can be reopened. All right, tonight we're going to hear from the Water Board, the city, and residents with varying viewpoints on this issue. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. All right, now to our guests. Ernest Lau is the manager and chief engineer of the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. He's been in public service since the 1980s, working for the state and Kauai and Honolulu counties in the area of water management. Brendan Ansell is the president of Friends of Haʻikū Stairs, a nonprofit which advocates keeping the stairs open and has offered to manage them. He moved to Hawaii from England in the 1980s. Maurice Mo Radke is the chairman of the Kaneohe Neighborhood Board. He is a 30-year Navy veteran and is state coordinator for the Salute Military Golf Association, which helps wounded veterans discover the therapeutic aspects of golf. And Guy Kalukukui is the director of enterprise services for the city. He is here representing the mayor because no one from the Parks and Recreation, which would manage the stairs if the transfer was made, was available. All right, so thank you all of you for being here. This has been a popular and in-depth discussion for many, many, many years now, and all of you have been involved for quite some time. So, Ernest, let's start with you, because you've been with the Board of Water Supply off and on for quite some time, back in the day, and now more recently. So let's talk about maybe a little bit more of the more recent history, say starting around, I think, 2002, is that right? When the stairs were renovated to a degree, there was discussion of them being reopened. What happened around that time?
So in the early 2000s, as the Coast Guard was closing the facility down and about to move it out, one of the requirements was for the Coast Guard to restore the land to its natural state, which has included removal of the stairs. So at that time, the then Mayor Harris, and I think there was a council member from the area, Mr. Steve Holmes, advocated for the retention of the stairs, keeping the stairs and trying to open it up to the public. That process was started. In fact, the city actually did renovations of the stairs. Almost $900,000 was spent to renovate it. A process was in place to actually transfer the property from the Board of Water Supply to the Department of Parks and Recreation. The Water Board actually at the time approved the transfer, but for the transfer to actually take hold, it had to get council approval. Unfortunately, in the council, the process stopped.
So, Ansel, you've been involved for quite some time. What's your assessment of what happened around that time?
Well, I think it was several factors came into play. One of them, it was around the time of Sacred Falls, and people then, as a result of that, people became very aware of the potential dangers of being out in, the mountains, as it were, and transferred that concern to the stairs, which was, in a way, was unfortunate, but it was things like that that caused the issue. And then at the same time, a lot of interest in Haiku stairs and an increase in illegal hikers, creating all sorts of problems in the neighborhood. So it was a combination of things, I think, really.
So all of you have been involved in some shape or form and off and on in different ways. And of course, it's just a very well-known discussion in the community. As you got more and more involved in the process and in the history and as we move forward, what's sort of been your assessment as to, say, that time frame, and then we'll kind of sort of move forward from there as to what was happening and in your slice of the community?
Well, I'd say from the Kaneohe Neighborhood Board perspective, what was happening was trespassing. And the trespassing became the main concern for the residents of the Haiku village area. And again and again and again, and the advent of social media showing, hey, this is a cool thing to do and here's how you can do it, that just exacerbated the problem. More people started to show up, and it became a much bigger problem than it started off being.
I remember seeing, gosh, I think I saw an article not that long ago talking about a turning point, and I had forgotten about this, when there was an episode of Magnum PI where they showed this, I want to say this was back in the 80s.
Oh.
And I was reading an article about it recently, and to have those visuals of the Haʻikū stairs, that was a marketing tool for the area, and it changed. And I think we have actually some video now too. And it really just, it's, I mean, you can't not show it, but it's, you can see why when people see footage like this, it's very enticing. It's very enticing. What are your thoughts?
You know, our wild areas, I think, are important. And this
now, you were with the DLNR for a while,
right,
too.
Right,
Yeah.
and so I can bring that perspective to it. It's a singular, really, opportunity for the city and county of Honolulu, because typically we don't have jurisdiction over much backcountry area, if any. And you know, Mayor Caldwell is very passionate about making sure we've got access to the oceans, and he likes to make sure we have access to the mountains. And here's one of our unique opportunities to be able to do that. I think some kind of, I think what lacked in the past was some kind of managed or controlled access. And again, kind of reflecting back onto my DLNR experience, knowing the kinds of things that can happen in the backcountry when the access is totally unmanaged, I think some of that can be mitigated by having a systematic program, and in some cases probably limits to access and limits to the number of people that will be accessing it, and means by which you can do it. Where you can prepare and gather and park in advance of doing all of these kinds of things that I think can mitigate most, if not all, of the problems that we've had in the past.
So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, there's kind of a fine line there.
So Lara, one of the things, and the guy heads the Department of Environmental Services, and I head the Board of Water Supply. Our missions are very different. So for Board of Water Supply, something like this is really not within our mission, because we're about providing safe drinking water to our community. But managing a feature like this, we don't have the expertise, and also it does expose us to a lot of liability should people get hurt on the stairs or near the stairs.
And this is something that the Board of Water Supply has felt that way for quite some time, that this doesn't belong in the
Ever since
jurisdiction of the Board of Water
the
Supply.
Parks Department said, oh, you own this property? Okay, well, here's the stairs.
Wow.
And now the security responsibilities passed to the Board of Water Supply. And since then, you know, we've worked hard to try to mitigate some of the trespass issues, because guys, right?
What have you, so in what way? Explain a little bit more. Like, what have you
So initially, you know, we did a private guard service at the base of the stairs.
When did that start around?
That actually started with the Parks Department. So we just kind of continued that practices, but it was funded by Board of Water Supply instead of city parks. More recently, in the last few years, we've actually hired special duty officers that would position themselves in the neighborhoods further away from the bottom of the stairs, but at a point where they could intercept people that were coming to the stairs to try to trespass up the stairs. And I think it was pointed out earlier, People want to start early in the morning when it's still dark to get up there to see the sunrise, which I am sure is probably beautiful. But the special duty officers have actually been very effective at trying to reduce the amount of trespassers. We can't totally eliminate trespassing because there are so many entry points to get to the stairs.
And this goes to the one of the viewer questions, and I think maybe part of it is optics and part of it is what you're talking about here. They're saying at the beginning of the show it was mentioned that security is being offered to block hikers and trespassers, but why is that not working? So your counter argument to that is it is to a degree.
It is. There's no. It's
But
difficult to get a
look at
perfect
the area.
solution.
Yeah.
Because there are different ways you can enter to get to the stairs. But the key point was through the neighborhood where there was a lot of community impacts. People unable to sleep because 2 o'clock in the morning the dogs start barking, and they wake up in the middle of the night and deal with the hikers. And unfortunately, not all the hikers have a lot of aloha when they go up there and when they come down.
And so I think that, Mo, that definitely leads to your, what you've been dealing with and what you've been hearing within the Kaneohe neighborhood.
Sure, at the neighborhood board meetings, we hear from the residents that have
So what
to
are they saying?
experience that. Well, exactly what Ernie was talking about was folks coming through at all hours of the night, trespassing over their property, and when they're confronted by the owners at perhaps 2 or 3 in the morning, it's not the most fun environment for either one of those two groups. And this goes back to what you were talking about in having managed access. If the access to the stairs were in another location away from the neighborhood, this mitigates a lot of the problems.
I think we got a quick graphic here. Haiku Stairs assistance calls. You see something of a difference here right behind you. Honolulu Police 2011, 20 calls. 2017, 160 calls. So 85% for trespassing complaints or requests for additional security. I mean, how do you respond to that, knowing that how much do you put into security every year already?
Right now, like you mentioned earlier in the show, it's about 250,000
we said, right?
for the private security guard and for the special duty officers. So to that end, we decided to move forward with this EIS, which was published earlier in this year, and there was a comment period up to August 7th. But the idea with the EIS, which the proposed action was for the removal, but it also looked at different alternatives, including transfer of the property to a government or private entity. We looked very closely at managed access, and of course, ultimately, whoever the landowner is and they want to do managed access, those details will be worked out at that time. But just at a high level, we tried to flesh out some of the issues, looked at what would be required, what kind of costs might be involved, what kind of revenue might be made off managed access. And in that evaluation process, it came out that the economic benefit is actually better with managed access as opposed to removal of the stairs. We did look at a number of ways to get to the stairs, because I'm going to say that there is no legal access at this point to the stairs. The stairs is cut off by the H3 right away. So we looked at half a dozen different alternatives, and the highest ranked one ended up being along a driveway to the Anchor Church near the Castle Hill subdivision off Po'okela Street. Of all the different options for access, that seemed to be the highest ranked access.
For people who weren't familiar with that area, describe that area and why you think that would be better. I don't know who wants to jump in too.
Well, I think firstly, I want to emphasize that managed access is really the key to this. If we can make this work, and a lot of thought has gone into it, this should be the solution that will make this work, that will enable the stairs to be reopened to the general public, and at the same time avoid all these problems with the unfortunate people living in that valley and are getting inconvenienced by trespassers at all times of the day and night. Managed access would be it's a situation where you have complete control over how many people go up, when they go up, who goes up. They get a safety briefing before they go. They're escorted on the stairs. They would have to pay to go up. There's no way of avoiding that, unfortunately. I wish there was, but there isn't.
I think I saw some proposal numbers. I wasn't sure if that was who that was coming from, but it was something to the effect of $10 to $20 for local residents, $100 to $200 for non-residents.
Yes, that's the sort of numbers that have been
Okay,
floated.
I wasn't sure where that was coming from. I just recall reading it at one point.
These are
Several different sources.
Yeah. It seems that a lot of different people, as you mentioned, have come up with the same sort of figures, and I think that's not unreasonable for local people. And there would be all sorts of ways of making special fees for students and maybe Native Hawaiians and that sort of thing. But for the experience, it would be actually incredible value. And we know that visitors are willing to pay that sort of, a much higher amount of money.
And this is, you've definitely got some of these viewer calls coming in supporting that. Caller believes the Haʻikū Stairs are a unique tourist destination. Why not charge a fee with waivers required? Money collected can be put toward repairs. And I think we have some similar ones here from Ryan. If you could establish an access point and put Keala Stairs, open or closed, all the problems of the residential neighbors would go away.
Well, Laura, I just want to point out, because there's so many different ways to get to the stairs, we kind of acknowledge that even with managed access, there's still going to be need to do some action in the neighborhoods that are closest to the bottom of the stairs, because people tend to take the easiest way to get there. Poʻakela is a little further away, so whoever the managed access contractor does get that business, then they need to do something to try to mitigate the people that want to get up the stairs for free and the shortest route. So we're going through this process of the EIS. I just want to say that once we complete the EIS, publish the final EIS at the end of the year or early next year, then after the legal challenge period, our intention is to bring this before the water board for a decision on what to do with the stairs. And it'll be up to the board to decide if they agree with the proposed action, remove the stairs, or look at transfer to the city. Mayor's made it very clear he is very interested in the stairs, and having Guy's department operate the concession that would be there. So it'll be a water board decision probably around the spring of next year. And we'll make sure it's a very transparent process that allows people to provide their mana'o.
So I just want to ask you one more quick question. So you're about done. I think you said you're still getting a little bit more in as far as the.
Yeah, at this point we're going to probably in the next few weeks have to close the comments and start working on getting the final EIS and actually the responses to the comments.
Can you give us a little bit of insight as to sort of what you're hearing?
Right now I can say that there's probably over 500 comments that have come in.
Wow.
We actually had, I believe, over 700 comments on the prep notice when it first came out. I think Vernon did a very good job reaching his constituents.
Wow.
So we also need to get out a formal response. As you know, the EIS process requires us actually to send a response to people making the comments if we have their contact information. So we're going to work through that process and then make whatever amendments are necessary to the document, the draft, and produce a final version of it. It'll be around the end of the year.
Okay. Yeah. So do you feel like the constituents in your area, do you feel like they're being heard? Do you feel like they're being heard in the right way? What's been sort of the overall feel that you're getting from the board?
From the board actually has a resolution that supports a managed access plan, and that was the majority of the board members representing all the different sub-districts in Kaneohe. Obviously, the folks that are very close to the stairs are not going to be happy with anything other than complete removal of the stairs because they've had to endure the trespassing for so long.
We got another graphic here, Haʻikū Stairs emergency calls. This is from the Honolulu Fire Department, starting with 2002. They had one in 2002, and then 2018, last year, they had 11. What are the numbers now as far as people going? I think they said about 4,000 a year. So I think that's actually down from the
I think
peak.
it's, I'm sorry I don't have the numbers, but
okay.
Anecdotally, I understand the numbers coming from the Haiku side, from the Haiku village area, Puoni Street, Koneki Street, is reduced, not zero.
Because of some of the security
well,
efforts?
there's so many different access points to get up to the stairs, so it's really hard we'd have to have an army of HPD officers out there, but they should really be focused on dealing with crime and protecting our neighborhoods.
That does raise the question of, okay, if you're talking about a managed plan of some kind, and we've gotten to the point of so many different access points, what's the reality of that being truly effective?
Well, I don't think there's that many access points. I hear what you're saying, doing the study, that there's plenty. It is a wide open space, but I think as far as access points go, many is how many? 5, 7?
Yeah. What's your, I want to let
Well,
Guy
I was
jump
going to
in.
say, I think there's a difference between access and how porous the area around the base of the stairs is. So there is a lot of ways perhaps to get to the base of the stairs, but I do think that when with some kind of managed access, and maybe what I should do is try to paint a picture of how the city sees it right now. So the city does want to receive the stairs, and the city does want to open it under some managed access scheme, where a not-for-profit entity from the community, through a competitive process, would be authorized to control the access. They would also be expected to bring it up to a serviceable condition and maintain the stairs over the life of the agreement, to manage the access, to create a collection point off-site and bring visitors to the site so that it's not people coming through Haʻikū on their own to get there, to limit the number of people who would go up on a daily basis, and to ensure they go up with a guide. Those are just some of the things that we've been learning as groups, such as the Friends and others have come to the city with ideas. So I wanted to say, concurrent with the final stages of Board of Water Supply's EIS, we plan to issue a request for information, a request for interest, to start a formal process that would culminate in making an award to an entity to manage the access to the stairs on behalf of the city. The first step is to see how much interest is out there, and we think there's quite a bit, and how they imagine this access working, which is the purpose of the RFI. So I would imagine folks like the Friends are going to respond to it, and they'll give us all their ideas of what they think should happen. Some of the folks who are maybe writing in or calling in tonight will respond, or a part of groups that will respond.
This is Alvin from Pearl City talking about shuttle bus service as well, off-site.
And so broadly, that's the way we imagine this happening. And those ideas were not necessarily ours. Many of those were brought to us. That's an aggregation of the interest that's out there.
So for the Board of Water Supply, we made sure we really did a lot of effort to try to identify the issues and alternatives to help provide a basis for either removal, or if a managed access system was in place, then this could become a resource document for the city as a starting place to look at. It's pretty comprehensive EIS.
I want to have Ansel jump in. I know you've been wanting to comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that the funds that are raised from managed access, the calculations we've done, that would pay for insurance, it would pay for maintenance, it would pay for security, it would pay for staffing, the guides, the docents. It would also pay for educational programs related to the stairs. So educate people about the history of the stairs related to the Second World War, but perhaps even more importantly, the history of Native Hawaiians living in Haʻikū Valley, and the native plants that are on the stairs. Right. I mean, there's enormous amount of things up there that we can educate people about and really make them, it's more of an experience, we think, for people going up there rather than just, a recreational climb. So that's what we envision. And all this would be cost neutral according to our calculations. So, but the security obviously is one of the key elements of this. If security doesn't work, I think we're dead in the water. But I do believe that an effective security plan can be made to work. At the end of the day, you have to actually get on the stairs to be able to get to the summit. So, you'd focus around the base of the stairs to stop people actually getting on the stairs, but at the same time, maybe have roving security within that valley area, stopping people before they can get and cause problems. And then at the same time, as we've heard, have an access route, an official access route that would be well away from the valley.
So some questions coming in. I got to get to some of these. Larry, who will pay for all of those who end up needing to be rescued once they start up? Since we know from other locations that that's going to happen. And another one related: who pays for illegal hikers who get hurt and require help from first responders? State, city, county. Who's going to be paying for that?
I have to
Still
respond to
city and
that.
county?
I think this whole idea of people needing to be rescued on the stairs has been actually blown out of proportion, and people getting injured on the stairs. The vast majority of people who you hear have to be rescued from the stairs are actually trying to come up from the Moanalua side and get lost up in the clouds up there, or get injured. That's quite a dangerous hike. Or they get injured or lost trying to get in through the valley in the middle of the night. If people were escorted onto the stairs, then once they're on the stairs, it's actually an incredibly safe hike. It's a stairway with railings. You go up and you go down. You aren't going to get lost.
We are seeing some video right now. This is showing from the bottom looking up right behind you, and you can kind of see that it can get a little socked in there. Sure. So that can make it a little sketchier when it starts getting socked in, because you can't see very well. And again, if you guys want to see it behind us there. But you know, and yeah, there have been some improvements that have been made. But here, I can't help but sort of think of some of the other areas that have become a little bit more touristized. That's not a real word, I know. But say for example, what came to mind when we were talking about this, two areas. One was Diamond Head, and then also in the Kailua area. Kailua area, what came to mind for me was the issues with the big buses, tour buses going out there. Yeah, they're being toured, they're being brought out in buses, but they're big buses, and they're increasingly large number of buses. And if anybody's been to Diamond Head recently who's familiar with what it used to be like 10, 20 years ago, boy, is it different. Even though that is a managed area, it's almost unrecognizable for people who used to go there, you know, many years ago. So how do you manage that, knowing that there's plenty of potential when there's money to be made, there's increasing interest, and if there's a managed type of a program in place, in people's minds, they tend to think that, okay, it is safer, which it may be, but how do you balance out those optics and the reality of what we're still dealing with?
I think Guy hit the nail on the head when it came to permitting and allowing a certain number of people onto the stairs at one time. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't envision tour buses bringing that many people, because the stairs can't handle that many people without it becoming a safety issue. So there is a certain number of folks that could go up, perhaps in the morning, and then another
Panama Bay is managed.
In quite a bigger spot.
Right. I'd say that's apples and oranges in terms of the amount of space, the area that you're trying to manage and restrict. So I do think, you know, the RFI, the request for information process, goes two ways. So in that process, we'll ask some questions, and the folks out in the community and people who are responding will answer and ask us some questions. So one of the questions realistically we could ask is, you know, from your experience, what is a reasonable number of people accessing the stairs on a daily basis? And start to get a sense, because we don't have that thought. You know, folks like the Friends and other groups that have reached out to the city, they have an idea. You know, they've actually run business models. They know a number that's going to work. Yeah. And I suspect, you know, I don't know where that is, so I don't know what the over and under is on the 4,000, whether the magic number is more than 4,000 or less than 4,000. But I do expect that it solves many of the illegal access problems when you provide a legal means of accessing the stairs.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The number that we've come up with is about 80 a day as a start. And that would be the number of people that would have a permit to go up there. And they would be the only people that would be allowed on the stairs.
Now, if you break it down, though, that's quite a bit more than what's going up right now. We've got 4,000 a year. And that's, what is that?
Well, those aren't trespassing through people's property. Those are going through a managed path.
And you'd have to factor in the certain days of the year that the stairs would not be open because of bad weather, and things like that. So, or maybe a maintenance day or something like that. So it wouldn't be 365 days.
Do you feel at this point in time you have a pretty good plan in place as far as what you feel a managed plan would look like?
Yeah, I feel obviously I'm somewhat biased, but I feel very confident that this managed access plan that we have would be a great success. I mean, after all, people have been thinking about this for 30 years. And it's a lot of good people have given input, and a lot of thought has gone into it. And it's not just something sort of off the top of our heads. A lot of science has gone into the background of all the numbers and that we've come up with.
So here's Kaluya. She's a lifelong resident born and raised in Kaneohe, saying, I oppose the stairs remaining at all. Their stairs do nothing but take away from the beauty of the Ko'olau mountain range. I feel by eliminating the stairs completely, it will preserve the land as it should be. I mean, no doubt, that's, I mean, in any of these areas that we're talking about, that is always going to be a perspective that has to be kept in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. The location of the stairs is actually in the watershed area. So again, you know, people going into the watershed, and maybe the managed access also part of the education is don't track in alien species on your shoes and your clothes, seeds that could grow and actually be detrimental to the watershed. Or when you come out of the watershed, you know, clean your boots. And but that's a concern, you know. These Mauka lands where a lot of people are going, and because of social media, they know how to get there. These Mauka lands are where our drinking water comes from. So we need to malama those lands, the watershed. So do it in a respectful and responsible way.
So a couple of questions, I think, along that same thread from Linda in Ka'ula and Bill in Kailua. Are the stairs in a conservation district? What is the regulatory process needed to transfer the stairs? Maybe these are a few questions. And what is the land use designation of the land under the stairs? Permitted use. What's the?
Okay, so the regulatory,
the
process requires, first of all, because the stairs is owned by the Board of Water Supply, and under a transfer scenario, it would be considered like a disposal, BWS trying to dispose of the property. So the Water Board would have to make a decision, pass a resolution supporting the transfer of the property to the city. Then that would be, we'd submit a resolution for that to that end with the council. The council would have to go through their process and adopt that resolution, I think, for the city to actually receive the land. The land, I believe, is conservation land. It will require permits, including permits from DLNR. I think it's the office of OCCL, Sam Lemel's group. To be able to allow get a permit to allow the managed access use in that property.
Right, and the access and the recreational use,
right.
I'd say would be consistent with what typically can happen on conservation land.
So to get the permit, the CDUP, I think it requires some kind of environmental document, and this document might actually be a 9/10 of the way there.
And we're not going to read that whole document right now. It's not going to happen.
It's a massive document. This is only volume 1, and there are
oh, goodness.
3 volumes here.
That's why we're glad you're here, to be able to go through all of this. You know, let me ask you this, Brenda. You know, I think one of the fears is that, okay, we have this, all these opportunities here in the islands to experience these beautiful things in different ways. But I think one of the challenges with social media, with what we're seeing online now, it's so spectacular. The thrill seekers, I guess you could say, is sort of the branding that's happening with a lot of these areas. What is your perspective on that type of reputation for something like the Haʻikū Stairs?
Yeah, that's going to be, that is, as you say, a big challenge, really. I mean, we get inquiries, our group gets inquiries from people all over the world who want to go up there, and they're willing to pay large amounts of money to go up. But I think you have to restrict the numbers of people, you have to have an effective security plan in place, and people have to just realize you can get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you can try and get on the stairs, but you won't get on the stairs.
You're seeing some pictures right behind you, too. Yeah.
You won't get on the stairs. You certainly won't get anywhere near the summit. And you could get arrested, you could get fined. And I think the mindset will be, hopefully will change so that over time, people will realize the only way to go up the stairs is to apply for a permit, pay the fee, and go up that way. And it actually will be almost a better experience, because it's a complete experience. It's not just going up, not being able to appreciate the plants that you see as you go along, understand the history of the stairs and the valley and everything. So it'll be a complete experience. And I'm hoping over time, that's just the way it'll be. I feel it could act as a model for hiking trails in Hawaii to some degree. because it's a big problem, as pretty much everybody realizes. And I know in countries like New Zealand, they're having to address that same problem. But by charging a fee, managing the site effectively, it may be a way of dealing with that. Otherwise, it's going to be a huge problem. It's just going to grow and grow.
And I think also the social media aspect, the same social media that helped people trespass can be the same social media that helps people understand the new rules that are.
Well, and I think that is ideal, and I think that's been the hope in many other areas. Have we seen that happen with social media? I don't know. I would imagine that argument's still out there.
I think DLNR has had some success around Sacred Falls by attacking through social media.
That's
being
a good
very
point.
clear that this is illegal and the consequences of what happens if you're caught trying to access the trail.
That's actually a very good point, in that it can't just be, hey, let's see if we can get the social media community involved. It needs to be a proactive, engaged strategy on social media to be able to, I would imagine, to try and see some sort of traction.
And in that case, that's just a full stop. Here, we can use it to drive the person who was interested to the legal means of accessing.
Okay, so what about legal action? Let's talk about this. The headaches that you've had to deal with over the years. Has there been any lawsuits against the Board of Water Supply or anything
Knock on wood.
on the legal front?
None yet, but
Yeah.
After you mentioned that, I hope it doesn't come in tomorrow.
I would not try to jinx you. I
We have
promise
not
you.
been served with any legal complaints about people getting injured yet, at least in the term that I've been at the Board of Water Supply.
Can the Board of Water, this is from Harold and Kona, can the Board of Water Supply grant an easement to another state entity, such as I think it says HIA, to improve and manage the stairs? Is that?
We looked at that, but one of the main reasons is actually to limit the liability. When you talk about the Board of Water Supply, think water ratepayers.
Right.
We represent guys like Mo that use our water and actually pay their water bill, and they pay for our operations. They also pay for any settlements of lawsuits that might happen because of the stairs. So in our view, transfer of the property is really the best way to go here on an agency that is more equipped in DPR and DES in partnership, a better set of skills of those agencies that can do a better job of managing it. So I would say transfer. Easements wouldn't really work for us. At the end of the day, they're going to go after the landowner. And the deep pockets is government as the landowner on lawsuits. We get sued over the sidewalk is lifted by our meter box 1/4 of an inch, and people trip and get injured, and we get sued for injury claims, and it's a kind of a litigious society
At this point in time. Okay, so just want to get to a few more here. We got the range of questions. Ryan saying it would be ideal for the state or Honolulu Parks and Rec to take over the stairs, as it makes for an amazing tourist attraction, and our economy is all about tourism. We should shoot ourselves in the foot if we remove them. But James saying stairs don't belong in the mountains, take them down. Tomo asking, I live in McKenna Street, and many hikers leave rubbish in the front of our house. How would those types of things be controlled? Would there be concessions? Is that part of any of these plans for each resident themselves if they deal with some type of damage of some kind?
Yeah, well, under managed access, people would go up, they'd be escorted on their way up. They'd get a briefing before they go up. And that whole thing about, what you take up, you've got to bring down, and that
Right.
sort of thing would be, emphasized, obviously.
Falling outside of that, would there be, what's sort of, I guess, the coordination that's happening with the neighborhood areas and assurances that, okay, if we're going to move this plan forward in a more coordinated way, and things still happen, are there some concessions being considered for people who have to deal with that if they agree to allow a more robust plan to go forward?
I see the people going up would go on this access
should
route, the
resolve
approved
that, is what
access
you're
route,
saying.
and there wouldn't be that issue. I can tell you that when we were doing maintenance days up there, we would go up and there's an enormous amount of trash on the stairs, and at the top, at the summit, we brought down 150 pounds of trash on one occasion. And there's, obviously there's plenty up there, but it can be a big problem, but I don't think it would be under managed access.
I think you bring up an interesting point, that if there is some sort of a problem, that the property owner would be able to call the the entity that's operating the stairs, and somebody would come down and pick up I think it's a simple solution, if at all.
Well, and I think you had mentioned earlier that perhaps part of the deal is either signage, I think you might have said maybe even a patrol in the area looking for folks and redirecting anybody who might be in the neighborhood trying to access. You could redirect them to the means by which they could do it legally. I mean, those are the kinds of things that could be written into the agreement that would put a not-for-profit on the ground there.
So when you think about some of these, I guess it's a public-private partnership we were talking about to a certain degree, but you can't help but think of the cost. If we're talking about a more comprehensive management plan, and as we add on these things that would make sense and create other reassurances, is the money there? Are you able to assess at this point in time or not yet?
I have to tell you, I thought it wasn't. I honestly did. I mean, I think the Friends are the first group that came and met with the city, and I think I sat in on almost every meeting of any group that came in and had something to say about getting Haiku open and their managed access. I've probably been in 6 or 7 of them. And I really thought there was just no way, because I had heard the early estimates. I mean, the estimates, I believe, from, I guess, somewhere around 2002, when the city got very close, got up to the cusp of getting it open again, was that the city spent then about $700,000 to get it to that condition, serviceable condition. Presently, the Department of Design and Construction estimates, and just the estimate of $1 million plus to get it to a serviceable condition. So with that number in mind, I'm thinking, how is that going to work for anybody? Nobody blinked at that when we shared it. When we said that in our scheme, the not-for-profit is going to be responsible for getting the stairs into serviceable condition, and our current estimates are $1 million or more. Nobody blinked at that. Their models work with that, it seems.
Let me expand on that a little bit. When you say in serviceable condition, what type of maintenance are we talking about here? And maybe I should also get you to
I think they'd have the better
as far
idea.
As what you've done, because you talked about that people from the Friends of Haʻikū Stairs, they've taken upon themselves for many years until you said, liability, and maybe you can jump in at some point. What were you doing? What were you actually doing?
At that time, we were, most of our work was actually with the native Hawaiian plants.
Okay.
And we discovered that by focusing on the alien plants that were invading, cutting them back, pulling them out, destroying them, that the native plants would actually grow back. It was actually wonderful to see. And so they just need a little bit of help and they would grow back. So like the next time we go up, it's like, wow, this is a big difference, you know. So that really works, and that's something that we would be doing. In addition, we were doing simple things like tightening bolts and identifying railings maybe that were starting to rust and that sort of stuff. So I think there's no doubt that on a regular basis there would need to be maintenance, replacing areas that have rusted, this sort of thing. Maintenance on the stairs themselves.
And your issue?
Actually,
that was up until a point a few years ago, right?
Okay, so the stairs is a metal structure. Galvanized metal, I think, was used in the renovation by the city in the early 2000s. So it is corroding. There is corrosion. So that would have to be part of the managed access contractor, would have to replace the pipes or the railings that are corroding, or the metal steps that are corroding, replace corroded bolts or whatever. They'll have to expend some cost. We did do an economic analysis. Unfortunately, it's in volume 2 of this EIS, the multi-volume EIS.
Book 2.
And
okay.
We did actually come out positive cash flow, even with the maintenance requirements that would have to be invested initially before the stairs could be opened up. But definitely there is maintenance that I think goes beyond volunteers. If you're going to do work, it'll actually should be qualified contractors that can do the work and do the work with the appropriate safety measures so they don't get injured on the job. Yeah.
So what are your, at this point, as far as, I hate to go down this road a little bit, but you look at all the assessments of, say, the rail, for example, and assessments that are made and what the cost actually ends up being. Is there a concern there that by the time that we get to the point of possibly putting in a management plan, assessing the costs, that will be at a pretty different point price-wise? Or are you seeing some stability working in your favor?
Well, it really kind of is driven by how busy the construction industry is in Hawaii's economy. If there's a slowdown, and I hope there's no recession coming, but from what I saw in 2008, prior to the recession in 08, 09, the escalation in construction cost was almost double-digit per year. After 08 and 09, when everything kind of financing became difficult for projects, that cost escalation really went down. So right now we're saying that if we got to remove the stairs, it's almost $1 million to do that. To open it up and do renovations, I think it was a little higher than that, but with the revenue coming in from people paying to go up the stairs, it actually created a positive cash flow.
Okay, so here's a question. If the stairs were renovated and officially reopened, has anyone considered how to manage the foot traffic on the trail, as in time limits of coming up and down? Have you kind of looked into that area as far as, okay, if we're talking about actual foot traffic and people going up and down, are we going to start to get
that's a great question.
traffic flows?
And you don't want to exclude people going up there, so you're going to have different levels of sort of activity, as it were. Somebody who wants to take their time, take a few pictures as they go up, rest, admire the views, this sort of thing, learn about the plants. And then you'd have somebody else who is really focused on it being a recreational experience. And I mean, some people actually run to the summit.
Okay, here's another question that leads to Robert's question, talking about liability again. Medical emergencies, I'm in shape. And it was tough getting up there, so we went up there. I've seen people who most certainly should not go up there. Has that been part of the discussion? We got people who definitely want to go up Everest, and are they truly ready, even though they're going to get the permit and they're going to get up there?
Well, there'd be some sort of health questionnaire attached to getting your permit, and then I guess that goes. The guides that we have, the guides that we have would be trained to look for signs of people who aren't drinking enough fluids, starting to get into trouble and this sort of thing, and just pull them aside.
Okay, so let's talk about the city moving in and saying, okay, we want to get involved in this. What made the mayor decide that the stairs would be transferred to Parks and Rec to be reopened? What was kind of sort of that? Was there a turning point where he said, all right, I'm all in?
I don't think there's a turning point. I mean, as long as I've been part of the administration, the team, he's been very consistent about his interest. Not only to having the stairs accessible, but have them accessible in Haʻikū, because there have been some ideas have been floated about potentially, if you're going to pull them out, can they be put in somewhere else? There really is no other experience similar. So he has been very steadfast about it's a unique, if not singular, opportunity in our community, and we should have that open, and it should be available for the people of Honolulu, people of the world, really.
I think the mayor has been very clear that he would like to retain the stairs for more than a year now, for at least a couple of years. So it's clear he wants to retain it there.
Was there a major accident? This is a question from Mike. Was there ever a major accident on the stairs? Death? Stairs?
I recall that there may have been a news story in the past about somebody maybe because they had a medical emergency, they weren't physically fit or capable to. Remember, it's almost 4,000 steps, and some parts are like going up a ladder. So there might have been a medical emergency that led to somebody passing away on the stairs.
Yeah, there was it was an unfortunate incident where at about 4 o'clock in the morning, somebody got into trouble on the stairs and had a heart attack and died. That, to my knowledge.
We also see happen on Diamond Head.
Yeah, it could happen at the shopping center. I mean, so that's another example of how managed access might help to, part of the safety briefing will be telling people, if you start running into trouble, stop, alert one of the guides. Chest pains, increased trouble breathing, these sort of things, it would help. And by chance, 4 o'clock in the morning is probably one of the commonest times of the night or day and night when you can have a heart attack. So, I mean, all sorts of things just fell into place and this person died, unfortunately. But in terms of the other question you were asking about people who've been seriously injured or died as a result of an accident, to my understanding, there's never been a case of somebody in that situation on the stairs themselves.
So is the city ready to accept liability of reopening the stairs? I'm assuming that's going to be part of the deal. except in the liability.
The city knows that it's the deepest pocket and that there's no way to avoid that. But really, in terms of the trade-off between making it available again to the community and accepting that, we want to make it available.
So, next question I wanted, this is kind of interesting here. This is Ken from the Big Island, suggestion, Diamond Head hike. They're going by foot. 700 feet, $5. Haiku stairs, 2,400 feet, $17. I think we had also crunched some numbers too about if you allowed 80 up there, I think it would be somewhere around 29,000 per year, which is significantly more than now. Even though again, the balance would be that managed plan as opposed to just kind of free form. What about working with some of the other groups? I think we saw a question here on, where did I see? This was here. Talking about caretakers and other people's, whether it be the stream, working with water supply, Coast Guard to protect the area. Has this been part of the discussion for management of the stairs, working with other groups that are familiar with the culture, the land, part of the community? How much is that
From
part
our
of the plan?
perspective, I think almost everybody that we spoke with wanted to include and intended to include a cultural component. In some cases, that was in collaboration with another party. In some cases, that was providing it for themselves. So I think, certainly I can imagine scenarios where there is an entity that's specifically responsible, but in terms of different aspects of the experience, they are partnering with someone else to provide it.
And I recall some of the maintenance days where Bishop Museum botanists were up with the folks that were maintaining the stairs, taking an inventory of native Hawaiian plants.
Now, if the idea here, or what the Board of Water Supply wants is for this to be transferred over, if at all possible. But if it is not, there is a plan in place or a discussion on how soon this could be closed. And my understanding is 2022, so fairly soon. Is that the alternative? Is that what you see happening if there isn't another entity that would be able and willing to take this on?
So again, once we complete the EIS and go through the 60-day challenge period, it will be a decision before the water board on how they want to proceed. And that decision could be, the proposed action could be taken down and begin that process to actually do the design and permitting to remove the stairs. Or it could be to just proceed with transfer, even though the city hasn't worked out all the details yet. But if the board feels transfer is what they want to support, and the mayor is a willing party to receive the property, then the board could take an action along those lines. Do we want to continue to do a status quo? I guess in the EIS, that's a no action alternative. That actually is probably the least desirable, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I decided here to do an EIS. This issue has been pending and troubling the community on both sides for decades. So to move this forward to some kind of resolution, I felt we need to do an EIS, and that's what we've done.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If it goes in either one of those directions, is there additional opportunity for community input?
I believe the process will be done at a public meeting, and I haven't discussed with the board the exact procedure that we're going to follow here, but it'll probably be at least an opportunity for testimony to be received, perhaps at one meeting, and if the board is agreeable, then a decision maybe at the next meeting with additional testimony available. Though I don't think, my recommendation to the board is within decisions that's so important to all sides of the community here, for and against the stairs, that the board, I'd recommend to the board to allow for public comment and do a very transparent decision-making process in front of a community.
So as we saw back in 2002, this went just about over the hump, and then through different types of pressure points, it fell to the wayside as far as it being reopened. Knowing that that's kind of the history, and that it really touches a lot of heat points for a lot of people, and that could potentially happen again, how far is the mayor willing to go as far as getting these stairs reopened in some shape or form?
Well, I believe we're in for the full ride. We certainly want to work with the council, ensure that if there are concerns, we try to address the concerns well in advance. I think, as Ernie said, unless the process has changed, and I guess it hasn't, council will need to authorize the receipt of the transfer of the land. And I'm not sure to the degree to which all the council members have been briefed on potential. I'm sure the council member of the district has been, is very well aware of the issues. So, we'd want to educate them on what we want to do and how we want to do it and how we plan to do it responsibly.
Well, thank you, all of you, for being part of this discussion. This is still a very important discussion for everybody and a lot of interest, no doubt. So mahalo to all of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank our guest, Ernest Lau, Manager and Chief Engineer of the Honolulu Board of Water Supply, Maurice Radke, Chair of the Kaneohe Board, Neighborhood Board, Vernon Anstel, President and Friends of Haʻikū Stairs, and Gaila Kalakukui, Director of Enterprise Services for the City and County of Honolulu. All right, next week on Insights, the first of 2 shows on sex trafficking in Hawaii. First, we'll focus on adults, followed by the sex trafficking of minors. Please join us. I'm Laurie Amata for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Ahui hau.